Hi, it's Tanya Taylor of Grow Your Wealth TV. And if you're new to my channel, this channel is about how to grow your wealth through reducing debt, through savings, investing, and implementing other tax and risk management strategies. So feel free to like and subscribe and share to anyone that you think could benefit. Also hit the bell to be notified of any new contents that I provide. So in this video, I will be discussing emergency funds, and I will cover three things. I will talk about how much you need, where to keep it, and how you go about building an emergency fund. I will also share some tips on some of the other things you might want to consider as you are building your emergency fund. So again, please comment below if you already have an emergency fund or if you are working towards one. I would love to hear what you're doing. Now, let's dive right into the first thing. How much emergency fund should you have? Now, there's sometimes a number thrown out there that you need to have $1,000. I don't know how someone arrived at $1,000, because if you talk to 10 people, each of them have a different financial situation and each of them have a different monthly expense commitment. So the $1,000 might just be thrown out there just to say at least have something. And I definitely agree with that you should have at least something just in case, let's say the car breaks down and you need to get something new for the car, let's say an extra tire. So at least you'll have that $1,000. But in general, as you think about building an emergency fund, ideally you want to have 3 to 6 months. And then if you say, well, how do I know how do I calculate how much I need for that 3 to 6 months? Because I spend on day-to-day things and I spend on also things that are necessity. Now, what you would think about is the things that are the necessities, the things that you know that if today something happens, I would still need to pay for those things. So what are examples of that? Your rent or your mortgage is one thing. Your phone bill, because nowadays no one could really survive much without a phone. So you want to also have something set aside for your phone bill. Your utilities, because you want to keep your lights on and you want to be able to cook if you're a person that cooks. So you would actually go through, if you don't have a budget, you'd actually go through and write down all of your expenses for the month and look at the ones that are considered non-negotiable. You have to pay them regardless. And then you would add all that up, and the total that you get would be the total for the month that you should be putting aside for your emergency fund. And then you would multiply that by 6. And whatever that number is, that's the number that you would want to work toward. Now, as you're listening to this, do you agree with the amount? I guess that's the question. So drop a comment in the box below. Let me know if you agree that 3 to 6 months sounds reasonable, or if there's some other number and how you think that you would arrive at that number. Now, the other question is, where should you keep this money? So you've decided that, okay, this is the amount that I'm going to put in my emergency fund. I need to put it somewhere. I would say never, ever, ever commingle it with your checking account or even with your saving account. You should keep this completely separate and identify it as your emergency fund and keep it as such. It should be accessible, but it should not be readily accessible where you're going to be able to just swipe your card and take money out, because if you do that, what's going to happen is that you'll be tempted if you're running short one month. Psychologically, we are just programmed like that. We'll just say, hey, I have this extra money. Why don't I just borrow from it? And then more likely than not, you're going to borrow from this money and you're not going to put it back. So I would say keep it separately. Maybe put it in an online account where you can access it within a reasonable time frame, or even if you open it within the same bank that you have that account, then what you would want to do is to not link it to your card. So at least it's there, it's accessible if you need to get it, but you also don't have it linked to your card, so you're not tempted to take money from it. And then I would say, let's say, so you've built up and you built to the 6 months. I also don't recommend just having the money sitting there and not earning interest, because inflation eats away at your cash, and over time it is just not worthwhile to have it sitting without any sort of interest or anything. So I would recommend that you would put it in a money market fund or a bond fund. Anything that's very low risk, where you know that you're not going to lose your money in the short term, and also where you know that if you need to tap into that cash, you can easily get out of that investment, whatever that investment is that you use. So that's the way you want to think about it. It is money that's there. It is money that's only available if you have a true emergency. So like during the COVID crisis, if you lost your job, you would be able to access it and use it to pay your monthly expenses until you're able to get another job. That's the way you want to think about it. And when you put together your emergency fund, you must know that there is a difference between your emergency fund and planned expenses. So let's say you have a car and you know that the tires will need to be changed in the next year. That should not come from your emergency fund. That should be something that you put in your budget and you're planning towards it. It's different from if you were driving around and your tire just bust open and you suddenly now need to have a new tire. So that was truly an emergency because it was totally unexpected. And so you'd tap into your emergency fund, you take that money out and you put the tire on, and then you'd go back to rebuilding that emergency fund. And that's where, like, if you had the $1,000 that I mentioned initially, then you'd take that $1,000, you take the money out of it and use it. So how much do you keep in your emergency fund? And I'm curious to know, where do you keep your emergency fund? Do you commingle it with the rest of your accounts, or do you keep it separately? Let me know. All right, I'm going to now talk about the last thing, which is how to build your emergency fund. Because one of the things you'll hear people say is, well, my budget, I spend everything that I take in, so I don't have an emergency fund. How do I go about building one when I don't have any extra cash? And there are different ways that you can do it. You can sell stuff. A lot of us have things just laying around our house that we don't use. If you kind of round them up on one weekend and just decided that you're going to put them on eBay, or there's Letgo, or there's Poshmark, or there's so many other sites. There's Facebook Marketplace. You can just start selling stuff on those places so that you can make some extra money. You can also decide that once you know your number and you're working towards that number, you could say, you know what, I'm going to get a part-time job and work towards building this fund, and the part-time job will be solely for building the fund. And then when I'm done building the fund, I don't want to have that part-time job anymore because I don't want to be working 2 jobs. So you know you have a goal, you work towards that goal, you achieve that goal, and you move on. So those are some of the things. The last things, and that's like my very last recommendation, and it's not something that I would normally advise people to do, but let's say you really need this emergency fund and you're like, well, none of those other options work and I can't think of anything else. So if you're contributing to your 401k plan, you may say, okay, I'm going to decrease the amount that I'm contributing, and you're going to set a time frame for when you're going to start back or increase it. So you decrease it, you take all that money that you're no longer paying into your 401k plan, you'd put it towards your emergency fund, and the moment you get to that point where you've built your emergency fund up to where it should be, you go right back to put in the money in your 401k plan. Because compounding is really important, and putting money away for retirement is important. So you don't want to kind of start playing around with that. But if you really need to do that to get to having that emergency fund, then you would do it. And then you would move on, and then you would start back reinvesting in your 401k fund. So those are the ways that you want to think about building your emergency fund, having it there truly, truly, truly for an emergency, and really not touching it until you have such emergency. So any other ideas that you would recommend to build your emergency fund other than those that I have suggested? You can just put them in the comment box below. I'm sure that they'll be helpful. They're helpful for dialogue and just give other people ideas on how they can build their emergency fund. Now, just a couple other tips that I would have for you is you can actually have a credit card, which you set aside to say, if I have an emergency, I can use this card in the event that I'm not able to immediately access my emergency fund. And so you know that you always have that there, and that is sort of your emergency fund. And it's always good to have extra credit available anyway, because the truth is that if we could predict emergency, would be good, but stuff could just come out of the blue and it's like very expensive and it's immediate. So you want to try to have you want to have your 3 to 6 months, but you also just want to have that credit card there just in the event that you need to use it. Also, I would say have some cash on hand, because sometimes you're not always able to access even a bank, but you might need something for cash. I know that for most things now we can use credit card, but there are those one-off situations where we may need cash and we just need to have it at that point in time. So it doesn't hurt to just have some cash on hand at home sitting there in case you need to use it. And lastly, I would say have someone that you're comfortable with. Just have the conversation with them. Hey, I have an emergency fund, but in the event that I'm not, and let them know where it is, but in the event that I'm not able to access it and I need access to cash, I would like to know if I would be able to use you, because sometimes there's a situation that comes up that if you're out of the country, let's say, you can't access your account because all your cars are stolen. But at least you have that person that you can say, hey, can you send me the money until I am able to access my cash? So those are just some additional tips that I would suggest to you as you build your emergency fund to also think about as you plan for all of your financial needs and financial goals. Actually, one last thing that I wanted to say as well is that you can also have an overdraft account, because then don't use your overdraft account as a checkbook, but have it there so that, again, if you cannot immediately access your emergency fund, you have access to that cash that you can use. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Please comment below, share your thoughts on the information I provided and any other tips that you have for people in terms of creating an emergency fund, and also any topics that you'd like to hear me discuss. So again, like, comment, and share, and hopefully this was helpful to you.